What's up, Lore Masters? Today's video is a part of an ongoing series that looks at what I would change in Star Trek Discovery for it to be more, let's say, nostalgic Trek. You'll need to watch the entire series from the very beginning to get the full scope, so click in the top right hand corner right about now. Don't worry, I'll be here when you get back. Alright, with that out of the way, let's just get into it. In this scenario, we are taking a look at the mutiny of Michael Burnham. From the research I've done, the point for what Michael did in the Vulcan Hello was for her to betray her ideals, her captain, and her crew. And then her arc would have her grow throughout Season 1 to realize that you keep to what you believe in and that Starfleet shouldn't change just to win a war. Basically Axanar's arc, just not done as well. Also, I guess I have to keep the actual Vulcan Hello BS, but we'll be modifying that a little bit to make it more sensible. In my scenario, the Klingon sarcophagus ship is in a standoff with the Shinzu, and the crew are attempting to figure out what exactly is going on. Now, my changes will begin at the scene where Burnham walks in on Georgiou and the Admiral having their conversation, and this interaction will stay basically the same. Georgiou and the Admiral will be pushing for peace, discussing ways to keep it from escalating, where Michael will advocate for violent escalation. She'll claim that the Klingons are a warrior race and the only thing to do is to attack. Of course, like we see before, she'll be dressed down by the cis-white male Admiral and the more diverse and superior to the Admiral, Georgiou. After this interaction, like we see what happens in the episode, the beacon is activated on the Klingon sarcophagus ship. Michael requests a moment to go and confer with other people, just like in the episode. Because I know if a United States patrol boat was facing down a massively advanced Russian battlecruiser, the XO going to call Dad to get his opinion wouldn't be worrying to me at all. This is, actually, where the changes will begin, however. Instead of talking to just Sarek, she would be talking to Sarek and another person, an Andorian. This would be a nice little callback to Enterprise, where we see a Vulcan and an Andorian now being strong allies, but with that undercurrent of annoyance and animosity from decades of fighting. In my scenario, Sarek would be her father figure and this Andorian would be like an uncle. This would also be another callback to Enterprise. The Vulcan would push for restraint, the Andorian pushing for brashness and hostility. The conversation would go back and forth with Michael in the middle, and again, while both sides were sniping at each other, there would be an underlying respect. They would simply disagree greatly. As the conversation moved forward, Sarek would say, "If you can resolve this without combat, the most logical course is to continue on that path." The Andorian would chuckle and respond, "Is that what your people did with the Vulcan Hello?" Michael, confused, would ask them to expand on the Vulcan Hello, and Sarek would look annoyed at the Andorian and then back to Michael. He would caution her that not every interaction is the same, and what worked for the Vulcans may not work for the Federation or Starfleet. Again, Michael would push and Sarek would begin to explain. Unlike in the original version, Sarek would explain that not one Vulcan vessel wandered into space, but the Vulcans had been trying to make contact with the Klingon Empire for decades, and every interaction resulted in the destruction of the Vulcan vessel. Multiple vessels, not one, because one is just fracking stupid, would be destroyed. It got so bad that the Klingons were beginning to encroach on Vulcan territory and destroy ships indiscriminately. Michael, very interested, asks, "So what happened? What did you do?" At this point, the Andorian would pipe up and answer for Sarek. He would say, "His people attacked. A fleet of 15 ships invaded Klingon space. They attacked the Klingons. It was a full-on invasion." Sarek would quickly interrupt. It was the only logical thing to do. With every other attempt at communication failing, the Klingons not wanting to communicate, we concluded that the one thing they would respond to was violence. Many Vulcans died, but this opened up a dialogue. "Michael, this is a completely different situation, and it was a different era. There is a chance that the Klingons will talk to you." Michael wouldn't hear the last sentence though. She would walk out with a look of defiance and knowledge on what she must do. The last part of this scene, to add a little bit of levity, would be Sarek and the Andorian just looking at each other. A brief pause and a smirk by the Andorian stating, "You know, I think she even looks more like me. Anyway, are we still on for dinner next week?" The scene would end with a very annoyed look by Sarek. It would then cut back to the bridge of the Shinzu. The captain would be giving out orders and Michael would just walk in, going straight to Georgiou. The conversation would be similar to what we've seen before, Michael emphatically arguing that they should attack the Klingons, Georgiou advising that that's just not feasible. That's not what Starfleet does. They don't fire first. The fight heats up and then the beacon drops, and sensors would begin to report incoming warp signatures. All Klingon. This would, of course, like we saw in the original episode, be the representatives of the Great Houses appearing. Like we discussed before, these ships would be antiquated and look like the ships found in Enterprise. Perhaps updated models for the technology we have in real life, but definitively from that era. Michael, looking over to Georgiou concerned, would state that this is the perfect opportunity. There was no way these ships could withstand a fight against the Shenzhou, destroy a few of them, and bring the Klingons to heel. Georgiou would be disgusted, stating she doesn't even recognize Burnham anymore. What happened to her? Why has she changed? She would rebuff Burnham. No, they wait for reinforcements and try for peace. And luckily, around this time, the Starfleet reinforcements would arrive. And then it would be at this time that there would be almost a calm or a relief. One of the officers would smile, stating that the Klingons would never fight such a suicidal battle. With the exception of the sarcophagus ship, there's no way the Klingons could withstand the assault from modern Starfleet technology. In the background, Saru would touch the back of his head and look worried. He would look up and state, "Captain, I don't think we're the only ones out here." Before Georgiou could respond, Klingon ships would decloak all around the Starfleet ships, weapons ripping into the unprepared Federation assets. The sarcophagus ship would fire its main weapon on the Shenzhou, a direct hit to the bridge, knocking everyone down. From here, the battle would go about the same. My changes would only include consistent talk about how Starfleet technology is ineffective against this new fleet. The Shenzhou would be disabled and left to die, like we see in the original version. However, there would be a slight conversation change, someone asking, "Why aren't they killing us? It would only be honorable for them to finish it." One of the crew, not Burnham, would look up and note, "I don't think these are the Klingons we're used to facing." From there, again, events continue on like we see before. The cis-white admiral would arrive and save the Shenzhou, and he would then have a conversation with Burnham, and we would see a small face-off. Burnham would push for them to continue fighting, and the admiral would have to pull rank. The admiral sues for peace with the Klingons, and his ship is destroyed for his trouble. The Klingon fleet again besieges the remnants of Starfleet. The last thing heard would be multiple ships' comms officers distressed in a general retreat order. Only a few Starfleet ships would be seen warping away. Cut to black. The next scene has the Shenzhou almost completely destroyed. The scene would cut to Georgiou on a medical bed, barely able to stay awake. Burnham and Saru would be on either side of her. While Georgiou is having issues keeping consciousness, her orders would still be clear: get the crew safely away and do not further antagonize the Klingons. From there, the next scene has Saru and Burnham in what's left of the ready room. Burnham looking pensive and Saru discussing how to begin evacuations without being detected by the Klingon ships. Michael, looking outside the glass, would ultimately say, "No, the war ends today." She would advise that the crew of the Shenzhou will begin a full assault upon the sarcophagus ship. This incenses Saru, who speaks about how this goes against Starfleet protocol and that Burnham was committing mutiny. Burnham would state that she is in command, Georgiou was not, and we could even have a callback, a flashback to Voyager. Utilize the same protocol that the Equinox did and have a fight back and forth, maybe a small little conversation. Ultimately though, Burnham would turn back to the glass and she would slowly nod, saying, "You're right, Saru. Go ahead and commence evacuation procedures." As Saru turned around and began to walk out, Burnham would say softly, "I'm sorry," pull her weapon, and stun Saru. She would then have him put in the brig, or at least some room that acted as a brig, since that was destroyed. Burnham would come up with a plan and order that the engineers get the engines back online for the Shenzhou. For this scenario, we are going to say that the Shenzhou had a chance of having minimal engine power and the ability to go to warp. With the medical staff, engineers, and those needing medical care staying on the ship, the plan would go into action. Burnham would assemble the crew and explain that they will attempt to blow up the sarcophagus ship and execute the leader. After this, they would be beamed aboard the Shenzhou and would escape. Many of the crew look uncomfortable, but she pulls rank and orders them to their post. The plan's simple. 3 teams will place bombs on the neck, the bridge, and engineering of the ship. She will, of course, be leading the assault on the bridge. As we see them move onto the transport pad and beam away, the scene would again cut back to Georgiou, who wakes up with the chief medical officer there. She immediately asks where Burnham is. After this, the scene would move back to the attack in progress. Initially, it would go well. The Starfleet officers would take the Klingons with the element of surprise. All three groups would begin to set up the munitions, but ultimately they were fighting Klingon cultists, and over the comms, Burnham would hear as Starfleet teams begin to be overrun. She would begin to give orders on what they needed to do to survive, but would be cut off by T'Kuvma. We now have the standoff between T'Kuvma and Burnham that we had before. However, because we have a human versus a Klingon, Michael's gonna get the ever-living hell beat out of her. And I'm sorry, this is the way it should always go. A human cannot stand toe-to-toe against a Klingon without assistance. The only reason she wouldn't be dead is because she would be defensively fighting and using tactics while T'Kuvma was attempting to use brute strength. The fight would continue for about 30 to 60 seconds more, and then ultimately T'Kuvma would just overpower Michael and grab her by the throat, about to snap her neck. He would mock her, saying that most of her crew was dead or dying and her attempt had failed and only solidified the war. She only further brought the Klingons together. And as he was about to do the killing blow, another Klingon would speak up, stating that the Shinzu was now moving and was on an intercept course with the sarcophagus ship, and they were receiving an incoming hail. T'Kuvma would order it on screen, and a beaten Georgiou would appear, her face determined. She would state that T'Kuvma was to release the prisoners or there would be consequences. The Klingon cultist would laugh, state he was going to kill Michael and then the rest of Georgiou's crew. Michael, using this distraction, would grab T'Kuvma's disruptor, a la JJ vs. Kirk, and shoot him point blank, killing the Klingon. Georgiou would smile faintly, and the last thing she would ever say is prepare for transport. Klingons would rush towards Michael and she would be beamed to a shuttle along with the survivors we see in the rest of the season. Burnham would look around and would see Saru and rush forward asking, "Saru, why are we on the shuttle and where's the Shinzu? It won't be able to outrun the sarcophagus ship." Saru would stay quiet for a moment, looking solemn and staring forward. He would then look to Michael and state simply, "Captain Georgiou doesn't intend to escape with the Shinzu." They would both then look out the window at the Shinzu, and the ship would crash into the neck of the sarcophagus ship, both exploding in a bright fury. After the explosions settle, we would see a damaged sarcophagus ship as it was in the original. The shuttle would then jump to warp. Cut to black. Okay guys, that's how I would rewrite the Vulcan Hello. How would you do it? Let me know in the comments below. We'll be talking about the mutiny and that scene in a later video. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next Lore Reloaded.